Let me know when to start.
Okay, I'll give just a little bit of background for people. We have 14 on, and it's sort of stable there, set 2 minutes after. So I think we'll get started. Just a note, first of all, we're recording this session, so if there's anything that you don't want to hear recorded, then don't say it, or don't do it on the screen or whatever. We're just going to be using that for our own internal. We're still figuring out all of the kinks in this, so we're just recording so that we can play it back. Jacob and I can play it back and kind of figure out in the organization committee and see how it's going, or how, you know, if it's working okay or not. The plan is, for those of you who are over in Slack as well, there's the DecisionCamp live sessions channel on Slack. And what we want to try is 2 different ways of being able to handle Q&A, and whether we'll support both during the DecisionCamp conference or not is kind of dependent on how this works out as we go through our test sessions. So one thing you can do is you can raise your hand on, there's a raise hand icon on Zoom. So yes, so Alan, I see you just raised your hand. So I will see people who have their hands raised, and then I can call on them and unmute their mic and have them ask a question. So I'll be like a moderator for the Q&A. The other option is that if you prefer to do this through the typed chat, don't use the Zoom chat, but go over to Slack and put the question in on the DecisionCamp live sessions channel on Slack. And then if we don't get to it, then Baljeet can come by later and look at any questions and follow up on your questions directly on Slack, and then everybody can see the responses. So 2 ways to do that. One is kind of live with your voice, and the second is with on the Slack channel, which I'll keep an eye on and bring questions forward as we have them. So I think that's it in terms of logistics. So Baljeet, I guess take it away.
Hey, thanks, Andy. Hi, my name is Baljeet, and I'm representing Rulesmatix today in this call. Today we'll be talking about Decision Services Testing Framework, and you can reach me at my phone number listed on the screen, or my email, psing@rulesmatix.com. So quick introduction of Rulesmatix. Rulesmatix was founded in 2007, and we provide consulting services around decision and business process management. And we have worked on various platforms, Sparking Logic Smarts, FICO Blaze Advisors, JBoss, Trues, and IBM ODM. And we have implemented several solutions for customers across industry, including healthcare, insurance, financial, government, and manufacturing. After, we have been consulting on this for, I personally have been consulting on rules or decision services for the last 20 years. And over the last 20 years, after working with so many clients and working on different problems, different platforms, different rules engines, different decision platforms, there were some common problems across all projects that we worked. And wherever we worked on various projects, we always try to come up with some utilities or frameworks to improve productivity and solve those problems. And keeping that in mind, we launched another sister company called Rulesmatix LABS. The focus of that organization is just to come up with the utilities and frameworks. And we have several frameworks. Our top 3 frameworks are Excel-based decision testing framework, which is what we're going to see today. We also have a workflow management framework, which is XML-based. And we also played around a little bit with rules management framework as more like an experiment rather than an actual product or framework. All our frameworks, the common theme is to keep it simple and small. All our frameworks are very low memory footprint, easy to use, no special hardware, software is needed, and not much of training is needed either. To give you an example, the workflow framework I talked about, the engine of that is just 150 kilobytes. Yeah. Before we talk about the decision services testing, as most of you already know, that whenever we develop decision services, we deploy them mostly. Most of the decision services are deployed as a web service or as a component developed in Java or .NET, and the data is sent to the decision services in XML or JSON format and other formats as well, maybe POJO as well. And the decision services process that data and return a decision output again in XML or JSON format. Most of the clients, wherever I provide consulting, and notice that the decision services testing is mostly manual process. Some clients I see have automated their testing processes, but mostly it is still a manual process where our customers try to use the decision platform inbuilt testing capabilities. So all the leading platforms, they provide some sort of testing capabilities. The data is prepared in XML or a JSON format, and I've seen clients using different tools like Postman or SOAP UI to submit their input data and run it through the decision service, and then look at the output returned by the service again in the Postman or SOAP UI and review those output manually. Now, one of the challenges of decision service testing in this way is that, number one, the test data grows quickly as we develop various test cases, more functionality is added, you need more and more XML and JSON files, and managing those large number of files becomes very difficult. And each of reviewing the test results in those large number of files is very difficult. Other problem we saw was, which actually nowadays it is becoming more and more kind of not a problem, but a challenge, I should say, is when most projects are done in agile methodology, and when we are developing the various decision services, we come up with some sort of a business object model to begin with. Then we write few rules, few decisions. Then we add more services, more rules, and then we have to expand the object model as we are developing the various decision services. And sometimes we have to reorganize the objects in the document model or the object model, and that requires updating the existing test cases. And imagine if you have 1,000 XML files with 1,000 test cases, and suddenly you have to add a new object to your test data. You can imagine how difficult it is to edit 1,000 or even 100 XML files manually. So that was a big challenge, and we tried to solve or address that issue using Excel-based testing framework. The decision services testing framework that we have, can be used to manage test cases and test data in Excel spreadsheets, and it helps automate testing process by increasing efficiency, reducing defects, and you can review the output in Excel spreadsheets. And one of the interesting thing that we did using this framework for one of our clients was, was very particular about storing all test cases in JUnit format. And so what we did was, using this framework, we actually stored all the test data in Excel spreadsheets, and then we used this framework to spit out JUnit code actually, and then we configured that code in their repository. So that was one interesting thing we did. I see Jan raised hand.
I think we're just doing some testing of the raising hands. There was a question about how to do it, so I had told him to try raising his hand. So we can you don't need to watch for the raised hands. We can do those in the Q&A at the end.
Okay, no problem. To give a little quick overview of this framework, it's a command line utility, and by looking at the diagram on the right hand side of the screen, So we store our test cases in spreadsheets, as I mentioned earlier. Then this testing framework reads the data from this test data from the spreadsheets using something we call it an Excel adapter. And then the same testing framework converts those test data into XML or JSON, and actually Pojo also, we can convert them into Java objects as well. And then through a thin layer to invoke the decision service under test, testing framework then invokes that decision service for each of those test cases. So imagine test data floating from spreadsheets into the framework via Excel adapter, and then testing framework converts that test data into XML or JSON format and then invokes the decision service. And then the bottom part is the output. Using the same Excel adapter, testing framework dumps the results in result spreadsheets that we can take a look at. It also spits out all the XML and JSON data that you use to invoke the service in files as well, just in case you want to take a look at the actual data, what was sent into the decision service and what came back from the service. So that's the mode in which this framework works. Now we'll take a quick look at the demo of this framework. For this demo, I'm using Sparkling Logic Smart's decision platform to create a decision service. And for the purpose of this demo, I've tried to simulate a loan application processing system where there will be rules to determine if a given loan application should be approved or denied. And we're going to use a JSON document model. I'm actually going to bring, can you guys see my screen? Sandy, can you see my screen?
Yes, I can.
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, great. I don't want to make sure. I brought in the Smarts platform I'm using right now. And here we have a decision flow. Very simple decision flow, starting with the validation of the loan application, and if loan application is not denied, then we determine rate, and then we go to the end. It's a very simple rule flow just to simulate a simple loan application processing system. And within that, we have rules to validate the application. Some of the sample rules are, let's say the loan amount is greater than 1 million, then the status is denied with the reason saying amount too high. If loan amount is less than 10,000, you deny it with the reason saying amount too low. Some other rules to determine down payment to loan amount ratio. Another set of rules will validate the applicant information, the income and credit score. Those kind of checks are there. And one set of rules for validating the property, like this property is in the state of New York, New Jersey, or Pennsylvania, then denied. And then there are some rate rules to determine the APR for the loan application. Just a very simple loan application processing system I tried to simulate. Now, the document model used for this particular rule decision service is a loan application, which is on the right-hand side of the screen. It has sections like loan details with loan amount, duration in months, down payment. Then there is a section for applicant information, name, date of birth, etc. Then there is a section for property address with the address and state, city, zip code, estimated value, those kind of things. And then finally, there is a section where the decision will be set in by the service to determine if the application is denied or accepted, along with a reason and a rate. So that's our document model for this particular rule service. Now, in order to test this, this service has been deployed on this as a service, and in order to execute this service, you would send JSON document to the service with all the information and expect the decision in the application decision section of the JSON document. Now, in this framework, so this is the Excel spreadsheet where we will be storing our test cases. Let me know if the screen is too small or if you cannot see the contents of the spreadsheet.
It's a bit small, but I have a big screen. I think if somebody was on a smaller screen or on a mobile device, they might have problems with it, but that's better.
I try to make it a little bit bigger. On this, so for this testing framework, we will create test cases. We store test cases in separate tabs. So you can store, let's say, application validation test cases in one tab, then applicants validation test cases in a separate tab. So you can create as many tabs as you want, depending upon the category of your test cases. Now, each row, I'm going to come back to the first 5 rows in a minute, but row number 6 through 7, each row represent one test case. So each test case has a test case ID. Then there is a description column where you can freeform put your, textual representation description of the test case. And then column E onwards, you see all these values. Those are our test values. And the values over there in the row 1 through 5 is actually our we are using Excel cells to represent various objects of our document model. So loan application is at the top. Within that, we have loan details, application information, property address, and within loan details, we have loan amount, duration in months, and down payment fields. And each test case, we specify value for each one of those fields. For example, for the first test case, I'm putting $1,001 in the loan amount, and then I expect the application status to be denied, along with the reason saying amount too high. So here we are actually putting all your test values along with a structure where these values should go in our JSON document model. So there are 3 test cases. One is for testing loan amount too high. Then the second test case, I change the loan amount to 9999 and expect another denial decision with the reason amount too low. And then there are rules to test the down payment to loan amount ratio is too low. So I've used different values to simulate that condition. If you go to application validation, again, similar concept. We have one row for each test case. First 2 rows are to test the applicant, and I've put annual income and loan amount values in such a way that the loan to income value ratio will be too high, so it will be denied. Second test case, I'm using a different credit score, a low credit score to trigger insufficient credit score rule. And last 2 test cases use property validation rules. One is to try to apply it for a property in Connecticut, and I will get no loan allowed in Connecticut, and estimated value too low rule also. So this is how we will organize our test cases in Excel spreadsheet. Now, in order to run this, I'll go to the command prompt, and I will just run batch file, which will invoke the test framework, and it will pass the Excel spreadsheet as input. And as you can see, it has executed all the test cases. And one of the test cases actually failed because the expected value did not match the actual return value. Looks like there was a typo in the rules, because of which the values did not match. Now, imagine if there are hundreds or thousands of test cases, it's very difficult to go through each one of them through command prompt output. So what this framework did was it created actually a results spreadsheet, and I'm going to open that spreadsheet now. And in that spreadsheet, it has highlighted each test case with pass or fail status, indicating which test case is passed, which failed. And actually, the third test case is which failed, and it has a fail status. And if you scroll to the right, it will highlight all the fields that match the actual value. They will be highlighted in green, and those that did not match will be highlighted in red color. And if you take your mouse over that particular field, it will say, okay, this is the actual value that we got versus what you were expecting. So then you can do a comparison. And if you go to the second tab, all the test cases here passed. So that's good. And then there is a summary log that shows each tab, how many test cases pass, how many fail. So imagine, you have 15, 20 tabs. So this tab of the Excel spreadsheet will give you a summary of total number of test cases that passed or failed. Finally, I'm almost done. I'm just going to show you the the files that it created. So you can see, like I was mentioning, that when we run this framework, it not only creates the results Excel spreadsheet, it creates different folders in your where the test cases are, and it will create one folder for each tab, and within that tab you will see input and output files. So let me open this one of the file. Here is the input JSON that went in, and if I open the output file, this is the output that came back from the decision service. So if you want, you can individually look at each file to see what went in and what came out. That's all. Any questions?
Okay, we have a couple of questions from the Slack channel. I'm going to start with those, and then if anybody wants to ask a question on Zoom, just raise your hand and I'll call on you when we're ready for you. So the first question was about whether each of the cells typed into Excel is according to the document model in the rules service. This was a question from Denis Gagné.
Yes, the answer is yes. Each cell, let me open the spreadsheet, test cases. So yeah, so this, the top 5-6 rows, depending upon how complex is your object model, you will have more rows there. The hierarchy, as depending on the hierarchy of your object model, there will be more rows here and more structure you will create. And if your object model changes, let's say if tomorrow you don't want applicant information at all here, you can just delete these columns. Or if you want to add a new section, all you just come here and insert and add a new section that is added in your object model, and then you can quickly do a mass update of your rules, a mass update of your test cases, I should say, depending upon the new section that you're adding to your object model.
Okay. All right, I'm going to call on Alan Fish. So I'm going to unmute you, Alan, if you want to ask your question. You have your hand up.
Okay, Baljeet. How do you cope with testing for where decisions might have multiple reasons? How do you check for particular reasons or sets of reasons being in the list of those returned, and are you worried about the order of them?
I'm sorry, I did not understand the question. Can you please repeat?
I'm sorry. As I understood from a brief glimpse I got of the rules, what they're doing is adding reasons. If you want to test that the correct reasons have been returned for a decision, can you check for multiple reasons, and does it matter what order they're returned?
Oh yeah. So is your question around can we check for multiple occurring fields in the output? Is that your question?
Yes, because reasons is a list. So
correct. Yeah. So here, as you can see, if there are multiple rules trip, then there will be multiple reasons returned in the output. And you can see here, I say reason 0, indicating this is the first reason I'm expecting, and the reason 1, and that way you can add multiple columns in the testing spreadsheet to put test data for multiple reasons. Yeah, you can definitely check for lists. I should have created one sample.
They would need to correct.
Sorry, I muted you too soon, Alan.
Yeah, you're breaking up.
But the reasons would need to be in the correct order.
Yes, they have to be in the correct order in which they will be returned by the rules. Yeah, that is correct.
Okay, let's go back to Slack for a question. And so we're in part we're kind of testing out our question and answer too. So Jacob had a question. Just do you allow spaces in variable names?
We allow spaces. It actually it depends upon what kind of input format you are using to invoke your decision service. Now, if you're using JSON, so you should follow the JSON standard for those field names. I don't believe it will allow spaces. But if it allows, then yeah, you can put spaces in there. So it will be basically depending upon what kind of input data format you're using. If you're using XML formats, you will not be allowed to use spaces.
Okay. All right, we're going to go back to Zoom. I'm going to call on Gediminas. Sorry if I've totally massacred your name, but I have unmuted you if you would like to ask your question. You have your hand raised.
Okay, many thanks. My question is, how do you cope with multiple instances of the given object? So for example, in your object model, you have one applicant, but in many cases in financial services, there could be multiple applicants associated with a given application. So how you would be populating multiple applicants? Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's a good question. Yeah, it's actually the same thing as the output, where you have a list of reasons. In the example that I created, it was a 15-minute demo, so I wanted to keep the demo very simple. So in this case, yeah, there is only one applicant. But in case, let's assume applicant information was a list, what you would do is you will have applicant information added like this. You can add like indexes and say application information 0 and 1, and now you have 2 applicants in the in your test cases. So you could have lists added at any level. Did it answer your question? He's on mute.
Okay. If we go back to Slack, then just a follow-up question from Denis, who had asked before about the cell typed according to the document model, and he wants to know if the data input cells are respecting the typing of the document, the range of the document.
Yeah, actually, what you can use Excel actually to implement restrict the values of the fields that you want to put. For example, state. Now, testing framework won't do any validation on the values that you put in the Excel spreadsheet, but you can use Excel feature to limit values of each cell to whatever you want to. But the framework itself won't ask you to limit any field to any value. For Excel, they're all string values, but you can use Excel feature to limit.
So now Denis has his hand raised, so we're going to call on him because probably I'm not translating his questions well. So Denis, you want to go ahead?
Sure. I was actually flipping to another question. So is this Excel template, the test case template, is it generated from the decision service model, from introspection of the inputs and outputs of the definition, or from the model of the decision directly, or is this all manually re-entered?
It's manual. So you need to start with somewhere. Start with you need to create it manually. That's the short answer. The reason we did not do it automatically from the given object model, because some test cases won't require all the object model elements. So we didn't want to create a huge spreadsheet every time, based on the document model, because some test cases will require only a subset of data to be sent in. Yeah, initially, yeah, you could have created a whole spreadsheet and then trim it down, but we decided to leave it manual. And it's, yeah, so that's the answer. But that's a good, we can think of adding that as a feature in future, but right now it is all manual.
Okay.
Well, you don't have to apologize. It was just a question to understand.
Let's take one last question on Zoom from Bob Moore. Bob, you are unmuted now. Or hang on. I'm trying to unmute you. There we go. Go ahead.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Good. Right. Okay. Actually, the question I was going to ask is just the one that Dennis asked, because it's obviously kind of quite time consuming to build these sorts of spreadsheets. I mean, I've had to do it in the past, so I know. But one of the other questions which struck me when looking at it is when you're looking at the output results, are you basically only confined to doing a kind of exact test? I expected to see this value, and this is the value that I saw, or is there any kind of flexibility other than just a kind of equality test? In most circumstances, you kind of have a situation where with a defined set of inputs, you're only going to get one output. So an equality test will be okay in most cases. But a few years ago, I worked on a system where it was essentially obligatory for the decision service itself to go off and access some information, and so that information might be different times you went through the service, and so you need to kind of be able to cope with that.
So most decision services are stateless. So given a set of data, they will always respond with the same output. So this framework right now is only able to handle those stateless decision services, meaning it expects the same output every time you run it.
Okay, so you're essentially looking for equality each time round.
Correct.
Okay. I mean, that's to be honest, that's what I expected you to say, but it was just would have been interesting if there was a bit more engineering.
Played around with the one idea actually in the past for one of our clients. What was the output of one test case was fed as input to the next test. There was a sequence of decision service calls that were needed where you call the decision service first, and it will respond back with a series of questions, and then you provide answers of those questions and re-invoke the decision service, and then expect the actual outcome. So there was a series of decision services calls. You will feed output of decision service as input to the next call. So we experimented with that, but that was a custom development that we did, but it's not part of this framework as of now.
Okay.
But this framework can be used to not only test the decision service, it can be used to test any stateless web service, which takes a fixed set of input, fixed set of output. Then you can use this to test any web service.
Okay, so that's it for our presentation time. We're trying to kind of run